Hi, I'm S.G. Brownlow with Adept Psychology. If you're like most people, then you've probably taken the Myers-Briggs Type Inventory or at least have some familiarity with it. If you haven't, it's online and I suggest you take it. It might help you make more sense of what I'm going to talk about. If you have taken it, then you know that the results that you get back are some code of 4 letters. So you might be an ESTP or an INFJ or whatever you turn out to be. If you look up that code, there's a whole descriptive list of what kinds of behavior you're supposed to like and engage in and the things that you do and how you see the world. And some of that's helpful to some people and some of it's not as helpful to other people because the test is not the most reliable or valid test that's ever been invented. What you may not realize is that the Myers-Briggs was actually based on some work that Carl Jung published now almost 100 years ago on psychological types. Why am I doing a video on psychological types, on Jung, on the Myers-Briggs? That's a really good question. It's something that I wasn't sure I wanted to do. I kind of stayed away from. But as I was doing some recent reading about the Myers-Briggs and about Jung's typology, kind of looking through this stuff again, I started realizing that I understood how it fit into the framework of some stuff that I'd been doing. And originally I was going to come out with a video about different therapist types, but I started realizing that to make sense of that, I really needed to talk about some other stuff to make sure that people were caught up to speed. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the first and last of those 4 letters, the either I or E and the either J or P. The second video, I want to talk about the middle 4 letters, the S, N, F, T, that go in the middle of the typology. And then in the third video, I want to talk about the 2 kinds of therapists, which actually only differ by 1 letter. So you'd think they would be pretty similar. But once you listen to these first 2 videos, you might realize why they're so completely different. So first I'd like to talk a little about introversion and extraversion. Unfortunately, a lot of what's been written about introversion and extraversion has been written, I think, by extroverts who don't understand introverts very well. And so a lot of what has been passed down has been a conflation with other concepts. And so we have what we call an anxious inhibited temperament is sometimes associated with introversion. Shyness is associated with introversion. Social phobia, sometimes with introversion. Neuroticism in general is associated with introversion. I just want to start out by saying that Carl Jung was an introvert, and he was the one who actually coined the words introversion and extraversion. Carl would not have subscribed to any of that. What Carl was actually talking about was something much more profound. What Carl was talking about was that really, as human beings, we each have 2 fundamental questions that we all have to answer. The first question is, who am I? And the second question is, what is the world about? And since we're rather social creatures and a lot of our world is other people, the second question really kind of boils down to, what are other people about? Now we have 2 ways of answering those questions. two very fundamental ways. One way is to see that we are embedded in groups and that we are very social creatures. And so one way of defining who I am is, how do I fit into groups, and what kinds of feedback do I get from other people when I'm engaging with other groups of people. The other way that we can do that is to see that although we engage in groups, fundamentally I'm an individual and I have my own ways of knowing who I am. I have my own sense of internal stimuli of whatever kind that I understand are representative of me and are not representative of other people. And so that group he called introverts. And the group who found themselves in their interaction with other people and in other people's interactions with them, he called extroverts. A description of how introverts and extroverts behave is to talk about them at a party and to say, well, an extrovert, when they go to the party, they get energy from other people and it just makes them more energized. And an introvert, they go to a party and it just sucks the energy right out of them. And that's why introverts are seen as wallflowers and asocial and all of that kind of social phobic and neurotic and all of that kind of stuff. That's not, it may be a good description in some cases, but it's not an explanation. And as an aside, I would say any explanation you hear that relies on energy and frequencies and matching frequencies or increasing or decreasing energy, that's not an explanation. That's maybe a description, but it's not a causal explanation. What I hope to give you here in a second is a causal explanation. Let's say that Jung's right and that everything that we've said up to now is true. If something that's a prime mover in my life is determining who I am, and I determine who I am by interacting with other people, I'm going to be very, very motivated to interact with other people because that's giving me more pieces to the puzzle of who I am. And therefore, it's going to be energizing to me. It's going to feel invigorating because it's helping me doing something that at my core I really want to do. It's one of the two fundamental questions I have to ask. On the other hand, if I define myself in relation to myself and I go to a party and the people at the party want to keep trying to define me, I'm going to see that as an attack by them, an unwarranted attack. And I'm going to be very wary of them, and it's going to take all of my effort to fend off their intrusive attempts to define me. And I'm going to feel wiped out and de-energized in that interaction. One thing that's interesting about introverts and extroverts is that they assume, both of them assume, that other people are the way they are to some degree. And so an extrovert, because they need other people to help define them, they assume that part of their job is to help define other people. And they do that on the basis of sort of how they are reacting to those people. They voice how they're reacting because they think that's helpful to other people. On the other hand, an introvert who uses their own internal stimuli to define themselves, uses what they see the other person doing and thinks that their job is to then let the person define themselves. Maybe some feedback about what you're doing, what I'm noticing from you. And so introverts and extroverts deal with things very differently, not only in terms of how they define themselves, but in terms of how they assume other people define themselves. So now we've talked a little bit about introversion and extroversion, which Jung said was the biggest variable between people, the biggest chunk of variance in how people interacted with the world and how they related to themselves depended on whether they were an introvert or an extrovert. Now let's talk about the last letter, P or J. Again, this is one of those concepts that has gotten, frankly, some bad publicity. We tend to see people that are loud and obnoxious as judgmental, and we see ourselves typically as not, oh, I'm not judgmental, or that person's very judgmental. What Jung would say is that, in fact, everybody uses their judgment functions. They either use them on themselves or they use them on other people. Where the E or I at the beginning is how we answer the first question, the P or J at the end is how we answer the second question, how we determine what the other person is like. If we are a J, then we use our judgment functions, which to Jung were thinking and feeling. We use those to understand other people. And we use the perceptive functions, sensing and intuiting, to understand how we are. If we are perceptive, then it's the opposite. We use the perceptive functions with other people and the judging functions with ourselves. So this is, again, judging and judgment is one of those words that has really changed in meaning over the years. The reality is we all use judgment, at least as Jung defined it. We either use it toward ourselves or we use it toward other people. Some of the most judgmental people that I've ever met are people who come out as P. They tend to be very judgmental about themselves rather than other people, but they reserve extremely harsh judgment for themselves. And they can also be very judgmental about other people if they see what the other person does as being a big violation of something that they personally hold important and dear. If it's a value of a perceptive person, a deep value of a perceptive person, and the other person violates it, then they'll be extremely judgmental in a heartbeat. So this covered the first and last letters of the MBTI. In the next video, I want to talk about the 4 middle letters. Until then, this is S.G. Brownlow. Have a great day.